Okay, haven't made a video in a while. I've recorded this a couple times, but it keeps being long, and I want to get it out really succinctly because I've already talked about this otherwise. Um, Gavin Ortland, Joshua Shuping, all these people, Gospel Simplicity, Austin. I like all their channels. I've learned a lot from them, but I keep coming back to the same thing. And it frustrates me, and I'm getting more and more frustrated that it's just people with my sort of opinions coming at these ecumenical conversations from a different angle are just completely overlooked, and we have absolutely no voice on YouTube or in these conversations. And 18 hours ago, Austin at Gospel Simplicity put out a video that's basically, is Protestantism the default? Where he's arguing, well, it's not always, but he essentially says, look, it should take you more evidence to change your beliefs than maintain them. And so if you grew up in Protestantism, we should, for the stability of our faith and our society, require a high threshold to change that than to, maintain it. And he mentions that, like, he just hasn't seen, in order to be Orthodox or Catholic and to change, he just hasn't seen those traditions be able to meet the bar of historical reconstruction. And I want to just really briefly summarize my problem with the entire YouTube community like this. In these Christian circles, they are all, whether they're Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, they're all coming from the same perspective of historical reconstruction, historical precedent is what we give the most weight to. Not speculative, or maybe what people see as abstract philosophical and theological speculation and reflection and rationality. And it really becomes obvious in these conversations, he hasn't seen history bear out the Orthodox claim of their own self-understanding. Same with the Catholic. And so he hasn't seen them meet that bar of evidence, historical continuity. And so he's going to stay and maintain Protestantism because that's what he's comfortable with. That's what he grew up with. It's more stable. Stupid argument. I'm sorry. It's not good. For a couple of reasons. First, the whole thing about it should take more evidence or reasons or whatever to change rather than maintain. I don't buy that at all. The easiest thing to do is to be skeptical. You don't have to go from Protestant to Orthodox or Catholic. You can go from Protestant to Orthodox, Catholic, and just, instead of those options, be nothing. Don't be a Christian anymore. Or be a mere Christian who's not tied to any of them and is investigating. And be truly skeptical and open. Why should you fall back on the beliefs you already have if you can't directly justify those beliefs? It's weird. That's a weird argument. You should be able to justify all of your beliefs in some way, whether that's through evidence and having arguments, or whether it's through, and it doesn't have to be certain, but whether that's through some sort of intuition, right? You should have some sort of justification for everything you believe. So I really don't buy that that approach for that reason. But what's really obvious to me is that post-Enlightenment Christians have just given up on metaphysics, on theology done in a non-historically reconstructive way, and the human innate ability to reason to conclusions reliably about these kind of lofty, seemingly abstract issues. And so we need to look at historical precedent and read off what's right for us currently in some way from historical precedent. And if we can't do that, then just give up. But I've mentioned this in other videos. Like, it's not necessarily the case. I don't see any a priori reason to think that in order for the Orthodox or Catholic or whatever denomination or church to be correct or the best one or the one we owe allegiance to or whatever, that they have to have a completely correct self-understanding of their development and authority and status. It blows my mind that this is still overlooked. Um, I guess a succinct way to put my point is that it might be the case that philosophical and theological reflection taken as not an abstract, but a divine science that does not just look at historical trends, but actually reflects in more, I just want to say, philosophical ways to reach conclusions. That might be able to bypass the messiness of history. In short, I don't really care if Gavin Ortland's right about icon veneration being contrary to some of the early church teachings. I don't care. Because if it's contrary, they're just wrong. Because there's really good philosophical reasons to venerate icons and to think that at the very least is permissible. And the church saw that in the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Like people like the Protestants and iconoclasts were just like wrong. I don't care about the history. I don't care if they could show me that the early church rejected it. Because, you know, if you look at historical reconstruction of theology, the Arians, in large, I know people don't want to buy into this, but the Arians, people who did not believe in the strong divinity of Jesus as equal with and one essence with the Father, they were probably a majority opinion. They were the earlier consensus. They are the more conservative group that had historical precedent. They're more comfortable positions. I don't care. There are good reasons to think Jesus is divine. And there are good reasons to think if Jesus is worthy of worship and prayer, that we need to give him this sort of equality with the Father, and that he needs to be one essence with the Father, because if he is God, God is ultimately simple. And so Nicene doctrine falls out of philosophical reflection, not just scriptural reflection, and not just historical precedent. My worry overall is that, like, people with my point of view, I mean, I've made videos. I know they're not the best videos, but they've just been ignored. They don't please the algorithm. But it's not just me. Like, people with like opinions like David Bentley Hart that he expresses in Tradition and Apocalypse have no place in this conversation that takes place. And so the sort of anti-rational, anti-philosophical, anti-metaphysical, frankly, anti-spiritual, overly historicizing and developmentally minded dominate these conversations and are thereby leading people to conclusions and shaping their thinking through their platforms without giving a voice to other ways of thinking or approaching these things. And what scares me is that, you know, I'll put it this way. At the end of our lives, we may have done a great job historically reconstructing, let's say, icon veneration, and we might be completely correct that it was a later development and that actually a lot of the early saints would have opposed it. We can be completely correct in those opinions, and at the end of our life, God may judge us and go, you kind of missed what was right in front of you. When you visited that Orthodox church and you saw the icons and you saw what was depicted there and in the beautiful artistic style, you saw the beauty and the goodness of those icons. and it did not make you weep, or it did not fill your heart with love, so that while looking at those icons, you lifted up a prayer of thanks and directed your mind to the subject of the icons. That's just that you're not, God might judge you and say, you weren't sensitive to what was right in front of you. You were rock-like. You had no sensitivity. You were so hung up in the question of what people before you thought. And that you missed what's right in front of you and the beauty of it and the power of it. Another one might be somebody spends all of their life seeking, and they do a great job evaluating, well, the Orthodox Church, it doesn't completely understand themselves correctly. They make pretty bold claims. Same with the Catholics, So I just can't really convert. I can't get behind them, right? God might come to you in the end of your life and might say, look, those things were important. But at the end of the day, when you walked into those churches, all you could think about was how they don't have a proper self-understanding, how they've overstepped their bounds in certain ways, and you missed what was right in front of you in the liturgy. You missed what was right in front of you in the life of the church, and how they, imperfectly, I'm sure, how they delivered the paradigm of theosis to people, of how they encouraged people to have aesthetic practices, of how they made it so that if you follow the church teachings, every aspect of your life is infused with beauty and meaning and unity with me. And you couldn't get it out of your head that, well, I'm not completely obligated to do that, because a lot of those things were historical developments. And you're thinking so much about history and how things have evolved over time that you missed what they evolved into. One more kind of loose analogy, right? Or loose hypothetical. I'm trying to think of how to word this. God comes to you at the end of your life. And, because that the early church didn't necessarily have a liturgy like the Orthodox and Catholics do, because there's some sort of development there, and you focus on that, and you know everything there is to know about how these things have developed, how the church developed out of synagogue into house churches, and then only later into, these kind of big cathedrals. God might say to you, look, I know you think you weren't obligated because these were developments, or because the history is messy and it wasn't linear, to worship me in a more beautiful way. But you missed what's right in front of you, because Chris Tomlin and American pop worship is a lot more ugly and commercial and kind of aesthetically bad than the liturgy. And that might sound weird to a lot of American Christians and a lot of modern Christians, especially evangelicals and Protestants, who don't really understand real historical Christianity, but God himself is beauty. Aesthetic value, God is aesthetic value. We can't be Christians and be subjectivists about art and aesthetics. Sorry. Just like we can't be subjectivists about morality. And so God may come to you and say, look, yeah, your low church evangelical worship might be actual worship. It might look in some respects like the early church. You might be completely correct that that these high liturgies and high church practices developed, and weren't universal and were messy. But you kind of missed what's right in front of you and thinking, maybe there was a more beautiful way to honor God. And to at least take a step towards something better. Even if you don't have it all figured out. You're missing what's right in front of you. That you can know by reading scripture, but also by just being a human being that God has made in his image and has given us certain faculties and certain intuitions and insights of knowing and prayer. This entire YouTube square puts so much weight on historical development and proving that there's this, if you're Catholic, this unbroken chain, right, of development. And it's like, yeah, there may be developments, but they all kind of are an unpacking of what was already there. It's not really contrary to things. Or Orthodox take that same sort of standpoint. Or Protestants use it against Orthodox and take that same point. In the YouTube circle, they're all coming from the same perspective. They're just arguing different conclusions from the same perspective. But it might really be that things are so messy historically, it doesn't matter. And we might just need to take a step back, spend a bunch of time praying, spend time learning philosophy, understanding what's beautiful and what's good, and then take a step towards trying to pursue one step better. And I'm not saying historical reflection and development doesn't matter, but there might be other ways to approach these things that don't get mired in countless, endless historical debates. I did not come to Orthodoxy that way. And I'm glad I didn't, because I never would have. I actually, after reading the Meditations on First Philosophy by Descartes, tried to do what he did. I was skeptical. I tried to wipe away as many beliefs as I could and just start over. It's taken me a long time, but maybe that's what God requires of us, is complete death of our ego, complete death of our trust in our own beliefs that we were raised with, and we get rid of it and we build back up. All the while praying and hoping. And it might take us our entire lives. But it might be that if we approach it that way and don't just fall back on like what's the default, or if we don't just fall back on looking for historical precedent, it might be that we come to radically different conclusions a little bit more quickly and easily and in a more spiritually enlightened way than if we just argued for our entire lives about church history. I don't care. I just don't. I find myself caring less and less about how things have developed. And I find myself caring more and more that the way they've developed miraculously seems to be correct and stand up to philosophical and truly theological reflection. And it kind of annoys me that my saying that in my very inarticulate, long-winded ways is just not popular, completely overlooked, not for my own sake, well, maybe a little for my own sake, but because the type of views I'm trying to express are views of Orthodox theologians and philosophers who have very radically different perspective. I'm sorry, read Vladimir Lasky, read even Callistus Ware. Read David Bentley Hart. These people don't all agree with each other. But man, they have a different perspective than the types of conversations we see going on. And it just drives me insane that no one in this YouTube space cares about us at all. Good night.